Tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's not something that you can even believe, right?
Oh my God.
Wildfires leave more people homeless in BC as forecasters watch the weather closely. Also,
Couldn't have come too soon.
Probably won't see any improvement in my lifetime.
The NDP is giving you less, and it's costing more.
a new tunnel for the old tunnel. In about a decade, the province finally decides on a replacement for the congested George Massey Tunnel. And
it's as much as a human problem as it is an animal problem.
Another coyote attack in Stanley Park. This time the victims were picnicking at 1:30 in the morning. Good evening, thanks for joining us. Some of the people whose homes have been destroyed by the White Rock Lake fire are now sharing their losses. Flames burned through neighborhoods on the west side of Okanagan Lake, damaging more than 80 structures. The CBC's Brady Strachan joins us live after getting closer to that destruction. Brady.
Dan, I'm standing on the shores of Okanagan Lake here, looking across to where the White Rock Lake fire is burning. Now, just around the corner here are the communities of Estamont and Killiney Beach. That's where the fire ripped through on Sunday evening. Many people living there have lost everything, and today they're grappling with the feelings of grief and emotions that come with that. Jennifer Carlson is holding all the possessions she has left in her hands. She fled her home in Estamont with her husband, kids, and pets, all the time thinking they would return to something. Flames fanned by strong winds overtook her neighborhood and destroyed her home.
It's not something that you can even believe, right? Like, it was like, for a day, you're like, well, is it really my house? Is it really my house?
Oh my God. Brutal.
These are images from her community. Carlson's house was one of more than 80 homes lost to the fire.
Which house is that?
Friend Sonia Dugan's home was badly damaged as well, a few kilometers away. There isn't much in her neighborhood to go back to.
Irreparably changed, even if people rebuild. I mean, just the whole feel of the neighborhood, all the trees, everything's burned.
Both women are living out of suitcases, wrestling with grief, anger, and exhaustion, and questioning how the firefight is being managed.
Everyone's furious, and it's the horrible part is, you know, the only time any politician has come on the TV to talk about it, it's been to say, blame your neighbor. If your house didn't get fire retardant, it's your neighbor's fault. It's a total lie.
I got 2 boxes of pictures.
Both women say they will rebuild when the time comes, and they hope their neighbors will as well, but they have more immediate concerns.
Well, you don't even know where you're gonna go, right? You, like, where are you gonna live?
Dan, yesterday officials notified people who lost their homes in the fire. For many of them, other than seeing videos and photos on social media, they don't exactly know the extent of the loss. So they're hoping that officials will allow them to get back into the area soon so they can see exactly what has happened there. Dan?
Brady Strachan reporting live on the edge of Okanagan Lake tonight. Thank you, Brady. A resident of Lytton is now suing CP and CN Rail over the wildfire that all but wiped out that BC village. Carol Moiseyevich is claiming negligence on the parts of the train companies. More than 90% of homes and businesses were wiped out in that fire on June 30th. The Moiseyevich wants compensation for everyone who was left homeless. The Transportation Safety Board is looking into what sparked that fire. It has taken several provincial elections and a lot of money, but we finally have a decision once again on one of BC's worst traffic bottlenecks. This morning, our transportation minister announced the aging Massey Tunnel will be replaced with a brand new 8-lane tunnel by 2030. As Eva Yuguen-Senge reports, commuters and politicians alike say, about time.
If you've lived in the Lower Mainland long enough.
They've been saying that for 10 years, and I probably won't see any improvement in my lifetime.
You have reason to feel jaded about the George Massey Tunnel.
Because there's always traffic here, and it's very tight. It was built a long time ago. We have more people now.
The 60-year-old tunnel connecting Richmond and Delta has some of the worst congestion in the Lower Mainland. But the province says a new tunnel promises a smoother, faster, safer commute.
I'm very pleased to be here today, and it couldn't have come too soon.
The government says a new tunnel has several advantages: fewer impacts to agriculture, protection from bad weather, and lower elevation than a bridge.
This project will allow to start work immediately on the bottleneck areas of the Highway 99 corridor.
The tunnel will have 3 lanes in each direction for regular traffic, 2 dedicated transit lanes for buses, and a separated pathway for cyclists and pedestrians, all with a $4.15 billion price tag. The BC Liberals have backed a 10-lane bridge for years.
So it was $100 million we'd already spent on getting going with building this bridge. Then the winning bid came in at 2.7. Now, and that's for 10 lanes. Now the announcement today is 4.15 billion for 8 lanes. So how do you figure that math?
And while various governments have weighed one option or the other, the current tunnel keeps getting older.
They just go on and on since the last government and the government before that. They spend money on other things, but you know, one of these days that thing is going to go.
A 3.5-year environmental assessment will have to be completed before construction can even begin.
We're looking at another 10 years, another 600,000 people moving to the Lower Mainland in that period when we're still going to be using that old tunnel.
Some construction is set to begin this year to improve the current tunnel, but work on the new tube won't start until 2026. Eva Ugwensenge, CBC News, Richmond.
2 of the main federal party leaders descended on our province today to make a raft of election pledges. Our Tanya Fletcher joins us now with more. Tanya, what is being promised, first of all, to help with wildfires?
Well, Dan, forest fires, yes, headline the campaign promises from the Liberals today. Justin Trudeau is pledging $500 million towards firefighting efforts. He says that money will help train 1,000 new firefighters and buy more firefighting equipment. He also says it'll go towards supporting Indigenous fire crews who best know how to protect their land. It comes the same day as the Thompson-Nicola Regional District, which has been the epicenter of these fires, penned a letter to the Prime Minister asking for more military help.
This fire season has been one of the worst on record. It's clear we need more people and more resources to fight these wildfires and keep communities safe. We know communities could have used more hands this year, so when next year comes around, this training means teams will be ready and complete.
Political scientist Hamish Telford says it's no surprise that Trudeau is focused on fires for his first official stop in BC, especially in light of the criticism he's received for calling an election right now.
So he's endured a fair bit of criticism for calling the election, as he knew that he would, in the same way that John Horgan faced a lot of criticism for calling the election here in BC last September. And so on his first trip to BC, he had to address that issue of forest fires and offer strong support for that.
Meanwhile, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh was also in BC today, near his home riding, to talk about housing. He's pitching a 20% foreign buyers tax that is believed to be on top of the 20% foreign buyers tax that's already been established in BC. His party's also promising to build 500,000 affordable homes over the next 10 years.
Do you want to let Justin Trudeau continue to let investors, rich investors, be the priority? Or do you choose a New Democrat and you vote for New Democrats who are going to vote for our team that's going to take big money out of housing so that it's not people competing with large and wealthy corporations, but it's people actually trying to get a home that's in their budget?
And Hamish Telford says the NDP will be aggressively targeting the battleground BC ridings like we saw today here in the Lower Mainland as they try to peel away left-of-centre votes.
Achilles' heels for the NDP, and it's not their fault, has always been the issue of strategic voting. They like Jagmeet Singh, they like what the NDP has to say, then they look at the situation in front of them and say, well, I really don't want the Conservatives to win, so I'll go for the next best option, which is Liberal. And the NDP is working very hard to try and stop that from happening again.
And as for the other 2 leaders not in BC today, the Conservatives' Erin O'Toole spent the day campaigning in Quebec, while the Green Party leader Annamie Paul was in Toronto. Dan?
Tanya Fletcher joining us live tonight. Thanks very much. BC's COVID case count continues to rise. We've recorded 553 new confirmed cases in the last 24 hours. And sadly, 1 more person has died from the virus, meaning we've now lost 1,782 people. About 42% of the new cases are in the Interior Health region. 107 people are in hospital, 53 of them in intensive care. Vancouver police are looking for 2 suspects tonight after 3 girls were groped yesterday afternoon around Falls Creek by a stranger on a bike.
Now, the first 2 incidents occurred around Granville Island at about 4:30. We had 2 11-year-old girls who were walking near the seawall at Granville Island when an unknown man approached from behind and groped one of the girls.
Police believe the suspect followed the young girls to West 6th Avenue and Birch Street, where he groped the second girl. 30 minutes later, a 15-year-old girl was running on the seawall near Science World when she was groped. The suspect from Granville Island is said to be an Asian man in his 30s, about 5'4" with medium-colored skin. He was wearing a gray t-shirt, dark shorts, a blue hat, and black-framed glasses. He was riding a red and white bike. The suspect near Science World had dark hair. He was wearing a gray t-shirt, light-colored or gray pants, and a dark ball cap. He had a dark backpack and was also riding a red and white bicycle. Investigators don't know if the 2 incidents are linked. They do believe other victims are there that have not come forward. Well, it has happened once again. Coyotes have attacked more people in Stanley Park. In the last hour, conservation officers announced a 69-year-old man was bitten while walking near Second Beach around 9:30 last night. And earlier this week, 2 women were attacked while they picnicked in the park at 1:30 in the morning. Benit Brach has more on the calls for people to change their behavior.
For Lisa Gruntman and her 2 friends, Stanley Park was definitely on their list to visit. But hearing about coyote attacks on people is nerve-wracking.
We came from Alberta and we had no idea. We hadn't heard it on the news or Facebook or anything. So we were a little bit anxious after we heard about it.
The BC Conservation Officer Service says a woman and her friend were having a picnic at the south end of the park around 1:30 Monday morning when a coyote bit both of them on their legs. Since last December, there have been at least 34 coyote attacks in Stanley Park, some against young children. Just 8 attacks were recorded in the 30 years before now. The Stanley Park Ecology Society says human behavior is a big problem.
We know that there's a lot of wildlife feeding. We know that people are here at all hours of the day. We know that there's partying going on.
And people feeding wildlife is a major concern.
There's evidence of people deliberately feeding these animals kibble, like dog food, literally. And so there's patterns there of habituation and rewarding animals for being bold and being accustomed to people. You know, unless people can get their act together, those coyotes need to be removed or that park will not be safe.
Conservation officers have asked people not to visit the park, and it's closed from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., though that is to try to reduce the risk of fire. The Vancouver Park Board declined an interview request, but says park rangers will be putting up more warning signs. Despite the growing number of attacks, a city councillor says they are taking it seriously.
We're all deeply concerned about public safety in Stanley Park. Certainly it's disturbing and alarming. Then we need to be looking at better education and signage within the park, as well as making sure that trash cans, recycling, all that is secure.
Xenakis says there is no easy solution, but there are some options.
Making sure people are getting ticketed for being here when they're not supposed to be here, that people are not feeding wildlife, that people understand why they shouldn't be feeding wildlife.
Xenakis encourages people to use the Van Connect app if they see anybody feeding coyotes and other animals. And if you choose to go to Stanley Park, officials say be prepared to run into an aggressive coyote. Benit Brach, CBC News, Vancouver.
More than 2.5 years after Meng Wanzhou first stepped into a Canadian courtroom, her marathon extradition hearing finished today in BC Supreme Court. As Jason Proctor reports, a decision on whether to extradite the Huawei executive to the U.S. now rests with the judge.
The conclusion of final arguments at Meng Wanzhou's extradition hearing marks a huge milestone in a case that has captured the world's attention. Meng's lawyers and the Crown have fought over every element of the allegations against Meng. The 49-year-old, who is Huawei's chief financial officer, is accused of fraud for allegedly lying to an HSBC executive about Huawei's control of a company that was said to be violating U.S. economic sanctions against Iran. The U.S. claims HSBC relied on those lies in deciding to continue its relationship with the Chinese telecommunications giant, putting the bank at risk of loss and prosecution for ushering funds tainted by sanctions through the U.S. banking system. Meng's lawyers argued that Meng didn't lie, that no loss by HSBC has ever been proven, and that there's nothing to connect any of Meng's actions to the alleged harm suffered by HSBC, which means that a fraud charge can't be sustained. The Crown, on the other hand, says it has more than made its case, which they say at its core is about dishonesty in commercial dealings by someone who lied to their banker to get services the bank wouldn't have provided if they'd been armed with the truth. The case has upended relations between Canada and China, most notably seeing the arrest of Canadians Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor in China on charges of espionage. Spavor was sentenced to 11 years in prison last week in what most observers say is a retaliation for Canada's role in Meng's plight. In addition to a decision on extradition, Associate Chief Justice Heather Holmes has to rule on 4 applications by the defence to toss the case for alleged violations of Meng's rights. The defence claims she was used as a political pawn, denied her rights by Canadian authorities, that the US lied to Canada about the strength of its case, and that the US is acting beyond its jurisdiction. Holmes set a next date for the case for Thursday, October 21st, but made it clear she won't have a decision at that time, just a better idea of when exactly Meng Wanzhou can expect one. Jason Proctor, CBC News, Vancouver.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us now with the first look at the forecast. Joe, let's go back to wildfires for a moment. There is some good news.
Yes, I do have some more cooler temperatures and showers in the long-range forecast, but we are still seeing the benefits of the weekend rain and the cold front that did bring those cooler temperatures. It seems so far this season when we've received these cold fronts, it's sort of been one step forward, 2 steps back, having to deal with the volatile wind conditions before we can get the good cool down. So now we're in the good cool down phase. I want to show you the current fire danger rate, and you can really see who had the rain, dropping that risk in through the southern interior. The Kootenays down to very low, where they actually had some snow yesterday, but not much rain for central BC, the Prince George Fire region, where you can see risk is extreme, and that goes for the island as well. This is where we will get some showers thanks to this cold front. Now, this one not quite as alarming as far as the strength of the wind speeds. It's sort of sliding through the southern interior tomorrow rather than straight across it. However, gusty winds and lightning strikes a possibility tomorrow afternoon. So a bit of a touch and go Thursday for wildfire conditions. And the air quality statement still in effect. We are still seeing rounds of heavy smoke, even though places like Kamloops and Kelowna saw the blue sky for the first time in a long time. Once that cold front passes through, we're looking at a couple of days of drier weather, and then that low heading through Haida Gwaii tomorrow will be our story right across the south coast. And Dan, that goes for Vancouver as well. So I've got your long range coming up.
Sounds good. Thanks, Joe.
You're welcome.
This week, the CBC's Wamish Hamilton is bringing us a series called Beyond Kamloops. So look at what happens after the revelations of hundreds of unmarked graves found at former residential school sites. Tonight, we're going to hear from a survivor of the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. She recounts her harrowing experiences and how she still grapples with unanswered questions.
It's just a painful thing that I know I'll get through this.
Still reeling from the revelation of unmarked graves at the Kamloops Indian Residential School, Mary Percival talked with the CBC about the 9 years she spent there as a child and as a teen.
We were all placed on cattle trucks that they used to move cattle. We were all transported to the residential school in those big, dirty trucks.
How old were you?
I was 7 years old. I used to cry every night in the dorms for my parents to be able to just hold me, tuck me into bed. And
it's been almost 50 years since Mary left the school, but in many ways, the school didn't leave her.
It's so deep. You know, I went through so many therapists to deal with what I went through physically, emotionally, at such a young age, and I thought I was healed. I felt good. I felt, I thought, okay, residential school didn't beat me. So I thought I was healed through it until this came up. with the 215 findings where I went to school, where I used to walk, where I used to play, where I used to go pick apples at the orchard.
The orchard Mary remembers from her childhood is where the 215 unmarked graves unveiled in May are located.
We could never understand why we couldn't go to the orchard to pick the apples. We could never, why couldn't we go there? We used to hear whispers, you know, about why we couldn't. But those kind of things, you get scared to listen to the stories about it.
But the orchard haunts her for a more personal reason. Her maternal aunt may be among the 215 unmarked graves recently unveiled.
For my family, I'd like to know if she was one of them.
Mary recently returned to the Kamloops Indian Residential School site twice. She made her way near the orchard, all the while wondering about her aunt.
It was kind of an eerie feeling. A sad feeling. I remembered the times that we used to always be told, you can't go there. Knowing now that's where they were buried. I hate that saying, get over it. You can't get over it when you don't know the answers. I'm glad that people are being able to go there and being able to start their healing. I want to go there a few more times. Then maybe I could let go, you know, and just let my aunties rest in peace.
Wamish Hamilton, CBC News, Vancouver.
News like this can be traumatic. Crisis lines do offer support. The 24-hour Indian Residential School Survivor Society can be reached at that number on the screen, 1-866-925-4419. And the KUWAS crisis line is also available. All this information is also on our website, cbc.ca/BC. Just a reminder, you can watch this newscast live on CBC Gem. That free app is also where you can find other CBC programs. CBC Vancouver is also on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. The man who once led Canada's COVID vaccine rollout has now been charged with sexual assault. More on the case against him after this. Thank you for staying with us during our commercial-free live stream. As we know, it has been a brutal wildfire season here in BC and in other parts of Canada. Thousands of people have been forced to flee their homes, often with very little notice. That is one fire expert sharing some tips that can help people be prepared to leave quickly.
So it's wildfire season, and we want to make sure that everyone is safe, whether they live in a small community or maybe at a rural property. And what are some of the things that we can do to prepare? Check the weather conditions. It's been an extremely dry summer, so windy conditions, changing in weather patterns. Recognize that you can do a lot of prevention ahead of time at home as well. Be prepared. Don't think it won't happen to you. If a wildfire does head over the hills or across the open field, you might have only a few minutes rather than hours or days to prepare. Things that you should do: pack a travel bag, or what we call a go kit. It has a couple days worth of change of clothes. It has board games. It has decks of cards, copies of personal papers. Don't forget your pets, so you might need pet food and extra leashes. You may be leaving somewhere quite quickly, so maybe some extra cash on hand so that maybe you know where you're going, a list of your emergency contacts. Please don't forget to back up those family memories at home. Things can be replaced. You know, your furnishings, your home, all those sorts of things. We want to be sure people are safe. Things like a battery-powered radio, so maybe you're on the road knowing where you need to go. Flashlights, anything that you can have for a grab-and-go kit, depending on where you're going. Often it's leaving home, headed to maybe another community, or you have friends and family in a neighboring community, city sort of thing. And also around the yard, it's dry, it's sometimes windy, we're still in lots of summer, so keep your yard clear of extra debris, try to trim trees away from the house. If you are so inclined, contact your rural fire department and get, can I buy a sprinkler system for my home? And all these other resources that might make your property just a little bit safer.
We're going to be back in a few moments with more news on the federal election and the latest situation in Afghanistan, plus other stories from around the world and this country. Stick around. There's another story unfolding in Afghanistan on a much larger scale. The Taliban's return to power could have an impact beyond its borders, and key players in the region are thought to have a hand in what happens next. Thomas Dagle guides us through a web of international intrigue.
This is what the Taliban want the world to see. Their long-exiled de facto leader, Abdul Ghani Baradar, returning to Afghanistan, ostensibly to a warm welcome. A key negotiator, he'll have major influence over how the group will govern this time. Though it seems some aspects aren't up for discussion.
The system of the government is clear. That is an Islamic government. Sharia law would be, of course, there would be no democratic system at all.
There's a sense of deja vu and dread for Afghanistan. Just listen to the cries outside the airport gates in Kabul. When the Taliban ruled in the 90s, only 3 countries recognized their government: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Pakistan. This time, there are signs heavyweights Russia and China are considering support too. Both have kept their embassies open and have held direct talks with the Taliban.
It will encourage and embolden them. Russia and China really are crucial for the Taliban to be able to operate on the world stage. They're both members of the UN Security Council.
Influencing the Taliban could mean even greater reach for China and Russia. They fear an increased risk of terrorist attacks at home. So does the West.
Will not tolerate a government that allows Afghanistan to once again become a safe haven for terrorists.
Pakistan is seeing crowds of Afghans rush to the border, and experts aren't believing that country's denials.
This notion that Pakistan is financing the Taliban and Pakistan is supporting the Taliban, it is a misnomer.
Fact is, the so-called new Taliban appear to rely on foreign fighters, and questions persist about foreign funding as well. The Taliban make hundreds of millions off opium and the drug trade, but could run into trouble now in government.
It's almost a certainty that donor aid will decline. It's almost a certainty that the assets will be frozen, and that's going to lead to a deterioration in the macroeconomic environment.
More evacuation flights are getting out now, but too few for everyone who wants to leave, fearful of what this latest Taliban regime will bring. Thomas Dagle, CBC News, Toronto.
Back in this country, the former head of Canada's COVID-19 vaccine rollout, Major General Denis Fortin, has now been charged with 1 count of sexual assault. The charge relates to an alleged incident dating back to the 1980s. As Murray Brewster explains, Fortin has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing, and he still wants his job back.
Major General Danny Fortin looked grim, gray, and frustrated as he spoke to the media moments after being formally charged with one count of sexual assault in a case that allegedly stems back more than 30 years. He says that he's received very little information, and his lawyers have received very little information about the charge against him.
So I've been forced to read much about me in media with no ability or no outlet to defend my name.
Now, Fortin was head of Canada's vaccine distribution and was relieved 96 days ago. And he says during that time, it has been nothing short of a nightmare for him and his family.
For the past 3 months, my family and I have been living this nightmare of not knowing the nature of the allegation, not knowing the status of the investigation, not knowing whether or not I'd be charged.
Fortin says that he is going to continue to pursue not only defending himself against the criminal charge, but also the attempt in federal court to get his job back. He has filed suit. That case will be in court at the end of September. But Fortin, in his very brief statement, said that he believes that his removal was political in nature. The criminal case against Fortin, he'll be in court for arraignment on September 20th. Significantly, that's Election Day. Murray Brewster, CBC News, Gatineau, Quebec.
Speaking of Election Day, we now know more about how exactly the pandemic will affect the federal election, including where and possibly how you will cast your vote. Evan Dyer takes us through the changes this year and what it could all mean for election night itself.
We are confident that we will have the public safety measures in place so people can participate, but there's certainly a lot of concerns.
COVID numbers are climbing again, and so is public anxiety, according to polls. But the election is going ahead anyway.
Whether you mail in your ballot or head to the polls in person, make sure you make your voice heard. Have your say.
18 million people voted in the 2019 federal election, very few of them using mail-in ballots. This year, Elections Canada expects at least 2.3 million to vote that way, even if COVID is well under control. If there's a strong fourth wave and lockdowns, that number could rise to 5 million. That has consequences for the individual voter who needs to act earlier if they want to vote by mail.
It's also important to note that by law, electors who apply to vote by mail cannot simply change their mind later on and vote another way.
When a person applies to vote by mail, they're struck off the list of people who can vote in person. They can still vote on the day if they have to, though, by swearing an oath.
Now, I know that Canadians are used to getting complete results on election night.
With perhaps 100 times more mail-in ballots than the last election, counting is going to take a while.
In most locations, this should be done within 2 days, but in some districts, it could take as long as 5 days, depending on the volume and the distribution.
Elections Canada promises twice daily updates as the count proceeds. A COVID wave could bring other problems too, as it did in Newfoundland and Labrador's election in March, when poll workers refused to show up. Polling stations will have COVID measures, including a new pencil for every voter. They could also be in unfamiliar locations this year, as some traditional venues, particularly schools, may not be available. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Chelsea, Quebec.
The Taliban continues its takeover of Afghanistan as people flee for their lives. Coming up, we'll speak to a BC refugee agency on how it plans to help settle Afghan refugees here.
There's a federal by-election next Monday in the British Columbia riding of Mission Port Moody. And the question is whether the Brian Mulroney bandwagon can carry the Conservative candidate past the NDP's big majority there in the last election. Jerry Thompson reports.
The by-election was called when Mark Rose resigned his federal seat to join the Provincial NDP in Victoria. The voters of Mission Port Moody gave Rose a wide margin of victory in 1980, 5,000 votes. But this time around, the race will be too close to call. The riding is a mixture of every kind of voter, from Fraser Valley farmland, where religion is fundamental and the politics conservative, to riverside sawmills, where workers usually vote NDP. There's also a slice of suburbia, Port Coquitlam and Port Moody at the eastern edge of Vancouver. There, the vote is unpredictable and the campaigning intense. Sophie Waremchuk is telling voters that the Tories will do to Canada what Bill Bennett has done to BC.
It was said by the Conservative candidate that really they don't have to enunciate any policy or programs until after the 29th, that he didn't feel it was necessary. And I think that's incredible. I think that's dishonest.
The people that I've
Waremchuk was hoping for a boost today from federal NDP leader Ed Broadbent, but a death in the family kept Broadbent in Toronto. Both the NDP and the Liberals say the real fight here is to stop the Brian Mulroney bandwagon. At a Conservative rally a few weeks ago, Brian Mulroney and candidate Jerry St. Germain hammered away at the same theme. It's time for a change, and the only way to get rid of Pierre Trudeau is to vote Tory.
Are you in agreement that we have to get rid of Mr. Trudeau in Ottawa?
Well, I think it's about time.
Okay, great.
I certainly do.
The Liberal candidate says it's better to send a member of the governing party to Ottawa than to elect someone who'll just sit in opposition.
I'm a Western Liberal, and I want to go to Ottawa and make sure they don't, that there's no question that they know we're here.
All candidates have one problem in common. Softball and sunshine are making it hard for voters to concentrate on politics. The New Democrats are a bit worried about this public honeymoon with Brian Mulroney. They're hoping that there's enough backlash against Bill Bennett's conservative budget to swing the tide in favor of the NDP. Jerry Thompson, CBC News, in the Fraser Valley.
Here are some of the stories we're following for you tonight on CBC Vancouver News.
It's not something that you can even believe, right?
People who lost their homes to wildfires in BC are sharing their stories. Some are now living out of suitcases, while others vow to rebuild. And forecasters are watching the weather closely. Some rain has helped, but they fear another dry spell could cause more destruction.
It couldn't have come too soon.
Probably won't see any improvement in my lifetime.
The NDP is giving you less, and it's costing more.
We now know what's going to replace the aging Massey Tunnel. A tunnel. The province unveiled a plan for a new 8-lane tube today, rejecting a 10-lane bridge the BC Liberals planned to build years ago.
It's as much as a human problem as it is an animal problem.
And it's happened again. More coyote attacks in Stanley Park, the most recent against people walking in the park at night or picnicking there early in the morning. Animal experts say people need to change their behavior. Canada says tonight it will resume military flights for those wishing to escape Afghanistan. There's no schedule yet for those flights, and they will continue only as long as security conditions allow. But as Stephen D'Souza tells us, flights aren't the only challenge facing those trying to flee.
The last few days have been filled with anxious moments for Sangin Abdul Mateen, trying to reach friends and family in Kabul. In that video of desperate Afghans trying to flee, he recognized family and fellow interpreters.
I said, listen guys, I saw you in the video, why would you guys do this? We were so scared and we didn't know what to do. We could just do anything possible to go out of the country.
He settled in Canada in 2012 after 7 years working with the Canadian Forces. Many of the interpreters he worked with are now stuck in hiding as the Taliban take over.
We don't know what to do right now.
We reached one interpreter in Kabul for the last month. We won't use his name. He says there's been problems processing their paperwork, though it hasn't been a problem for some.
Some guys from the Kandahar and from the Kabul without filling any forms. They are right now in Canada. We don't know how it's possible.
Stephen Watt is leading a group of volunteers who guide people through the immigration bureaucracy.
The idea that they would have the ability of, say, a middle-class Canadian to go to the office, fill out a bunch of PDFs, put their signatures on, it would be farcical if it weren't their reality.
The Prime Minister, who's committed to bringing 20,000 Afghans to Canada, says paperwork is not the holdup.
The limiting factor on getting people out of Afghanistan right now is people being unable to get to the airport.
Abdul Mateen has family sleeping on the street outside the airport right now. They have Canadian government approval, but no word on a flight.
The Canada program is just stopped, and the situation is really hard in here.
With gunfire echoing outside the airport, his family is pleading for help.
We helped Canada in Afghanistan when they were in Afghanistan. This is the time to help us.
A plea they hope is heard before it's too late. Stephen D'Souza, CBC News, Oshawa, Ontario.
As the federal government pledges to help 20,000 Afghans get to safety here in Canada, organizations in our province will be among those stepping up to welcome refugees fleeing the Taliban. Maharit Bisrat is the manager of refugee and specialized programs at Diversity, Community and Resources Society. Maharit, first of all, what are you doing right now to prepare to welcome Afghan refugees to BC?
Well, we heard the news as it came out, and so we are planning whatever resources we need to mobilize as soon as we know the landing numbers that will be coming to BC. We were at the forefront of Operation Syrian Refugee when we had the influx of 35,000 refugees coming here. We're well equipped to do this work, and within the sector, we're very well connected with all of the other service providers.
You mentioned your help welcoming Syrian refugees to Canada. Like those coming from Afghanistan, many of these refugees will be harboring some very traumatic memories. How important is it for organizations like yourselves and volunteers to approach and assist these refugees in a trauma-informed way?
It's very important. Being trauma-informed essentially means that you take a holistic view of the person's experience, past and present, and support them without re-traumatizing them in the process. We let them know that they have rights and responsibilities. That's really, really important in restoring a sense of dignity and belonging here. And because of what has happened and the trauma they've experienced, trusting authority, trusting other members of the community can be difficult. So when they come here, they are stepping away from everything that is familiar, everything they've worked their whole lives to establish. So they really need support networks. So communities being welcoming and inclusive. And I also stress that community service providers or other professions also need to work on building their cultural competency and understanding how trauma plays out as people resettle. The other thing is also establishing a sense of choice and agency that can be taken away when people have to leave and it's a forced choice. So that those factors are really, really important.
And lastly, if I may ask, if somebody's watching this and wondering how they can help, whether it's a donation or some other way, quickly, what's the best advice you have for them?
The best advice is get involved. There are many settlement organizations like Diversity Community Resources Society. Reach out to us. We can put you in touch, whether it's volunteering your time or providing resources and donations. We're more than happy to hear from you. So please do get in touch.
Maharit Bisrat, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Haitians are struggling in the aftermath of last weekend's earthquake that killed nearly 2,000 people. We'll have more from those looking for shelter. Stick around. And at 6:42 Alive, look at Crystal Cove Beach Resort in Tofino. Johanna will join us with details on some rain on the way. The full provincial forecast is next. Tens of thousands of people in Haiti are living in increasingly horrid conditions. The country is struggling in the aftermath of last Saturday's massive earthquake, which killed more than 1,900. And residents are trying to find some form of shelter. Our Ellen Morrow is in Haiti, reporting from one area ravaged by that quake.
We're in Lytton, one of the hardest hit areas by the earthquake, and this is a tent city that's been growing here in the center of the town ever since Saturday when the earthquake struck. And take a look at the conditions people here are having to live in. You know, a tent city is a misnomer. These are not tents. These are wooden structures, sticks essentially, with sheets on top of them, blankets, plastic in the best case scenario. But these are the desperate conditions people are having to live in. Just look over there, that person washing their clothes with tubs of water because there really just isn't any other choice here. It's incredibly desperate. And there was a tropical weather system just a few days ago. Look at the ground. There are kids living in this area, and look at the ground. There's mud, there's standing water. It's not a safe environment. One woman over there told us that things have been taken from her structure. People here are just completely desperate, and there are hundreds, you know, if not thousands of people who are currently calling this tent city, and again, that's not even really the right word, home. It's incredibly desperate. And when we came in to this area, people immediately gathered around us to tell us how upset they were because they say here they haven't received any aid at all, and they've been here for several days at this point. So there's mounting desperation, and with that desperation is anger. Take a look at this. These little boys here having to dig, or I guess help support the sticks in the ground there. That's where their families are currently calling home. Children trying to build these makeshift structures for their entire family. This is an area that desperately needs help. The people here say they are simply not getting it. Ellen Morrow, CBC News, Lytton.
Meteorologist Johanna Wagstaffe joins us once again with the provincial forecast. Joe, earlier you mentioned some cooler weather, some rain, good for the wildfire situation. What's the picture province-wide, I guess?
We've got an exiting low and a building high and then another low pressure system. There is more going on across BC in the next few days than we've seen all summer. We've just had high pressure after high pressure. So things are moving, you can say, in our atmosphere. The jet stream is helping to move things along rather than this locked or blocked pattern we've been dealing with. So let me take you first to the current temperatures across Metro Vancouver. 20 right now at YVR. We are in a high pressure ridge that is just sitting off our shore. Generally, that sinking air means hot weather, but we're only just a couple of degrees above seasonal for many places across the southwest. Nothing record-breaking about this high-pressure dome or heat wave, not heat wave, I should say. Looking at the satellite and radar, not much to speak of in the way of clouds, but I do think we'll see some sneak in through the overnight and early morning hours, similar to what we saw yesterday, sort of starting off with some morning cloud before we get to the sunshine. Look at that cold front track through the interior. That's the one I mentioned earlier, bringing some pop-up thunderstorms, some good showers, possibly some gusty winds, but not quite as volatile a situation as we saw over the weekend. That high pressure that's bringing us the calmer weather is actually retrograding, heading back out to the Pacific, and that's opening the door to that low pressure system skirting down into our neck of the woods Friday into the weekend. So you can see that rain showing up in Vancouver's forecast. We'll hone in on that in just a moment. But quick, the provincial temperatures, especially in through central and southern British Columbia, staying below 30, even as we head into the weekend. That's some good news. Anytime we see temperatures hitting 30, that's sort of a benchmark for fuels drying out very quickly. So while we'll see some smoke, concerns for lightning tomorrow, into the weekend, cooler temperatures and showers, definitely a good news story, as I mentioned earlier. For us on the south coast, we won't see as much of that rain. 23 tomorrow, clearing skies, and then temperatures coming down as we get the tail end of that cold front. Best chance of showers tomorrow afternoon. Hard to say how much we'll get, but I think we'll see something with some sunny breaks. Break day in there for Saturday with some sunshine, and then hopefully Saturday night into Sunday, lingering through Monday, rounds of showers. And those temperatures a couple of degrees below seasonal as well, Dan. So all in all, kind of forecast we've been wanting to see for quite some time.
No kidding. Thank you very much, Joe.
You're welcome.
A 16-year-old is using her love of art to create something new in her community. a connection between seniors and teens. The West Vancouver girl has been hosting intergenerational painting sessions. As Isabel Regem tells us and shows us, both seniors and teens walk away with more than just artwork.
Okay, let me know if you need some more.
Thank you. A new painting completed every workshop.
The hands aren't as steady as they used to be.
This intergenerational art session is the pandemic project of 16-year-old Jenna Yu.
During quarantine, I definitely started painting a lot more because when you can't really go outside, I mean, what else do you do? So I thought maybe we could bring that to other people and also introduce them to the world of painting.
It's why she's launched a nonprofit called Youth Art for Action with some friends. Among the initiatives are these classes. Most weeks, they gather outdoors for some plein air painting. When it rains, they move indoors. Today's piece is this ombre sunset.
We have a good inspiration here and have the girls encouraging us.
As you go down the canvas, you might want to use a little bit of yellow.
Unless you're Ellis, then you come up with your own creation.
Oh, it's just an old barn in my imagination.
That's nothing new, according to his wife of over 60 years.
Has he always been like this? Does his own?
Oh yeah, oh yes, oh yeah. Mr. Independent.
The soon-to-be grade 12 student at Collingwood Secondary says the lessons go well beyond the canvas.
While we're teaching seniors how to paint, I'm also learning so much. Here's some stories from a time before we were even born.
So far, the sessions have been held at Amica West Vancouver Residence, which provides most of the art supplies. Staff say it's something residents can look forward to after a long and isolating year.
They were really excited and they were looking forward to new stuff to learn, not only just painting.
When Youth Art for Action isn't hosting workshops, members are donating art to the community and selling pieces to raise money for charity. Yu says she plans to expand the dates and locations of the workshops with a goal of creating a province-wide network of teen artists painting and learning with seniors. Isabel Regem, CBC News, West Vancouver.
The BC Lions have a new owner. Coming up, we'll introduce you to Amar Doman and what that means for the Leos. Stick around.
Focus on the future, not the past.
That happened hundreds of years ago.
Our generation had nothing to do with it.
Why can't blacks just get over slavery?
These are statements made by politicians, educators, and average citizens.
They express the sentiment that the past is gone. It's over. We can never go back.
The only thing that we have control over is how we act in the present.
Unfortunately, these statements ignore reality.
Actions and policies of the past have profound consequences for today and tomorrow. For the first 100 years of Canada's existence, there is a white Canada immigration policy. From Confederation to 1962, the white Canadian population was 97%. Today, that number is about 73%.
So what are the consequences today of the white Canada immigration policy? Nearly half of Canadians feel that they are under threat from immigration, and a quarter of Canadians think it's perfectly fine to be prejudiced against people of other races.
There is no question that events of the past have profound consequences for today. For some people, that might mean intergenerational trauma, and for other people, they might think that being born in Canada means that having a predominantly white population is normal, and that other people are the immigrants who could go back to where they came from. These modern-day beliefs are the result of intentional, calculated government policies.
Many of us are only learning about our racist history now. Why weren't we ever taught these things in history classes or Canadian studies?
institutions, historical individuals who we've been taught to revere have attained their prominence through incomplete and often concealed historical information.
Nelson Mandela said that education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world.
What would happen if we cracked open our history books and uncovered the brutal details of our race's history?
What would happen if we studied and taught history from a critical perspective rather than naive idealism?
How would knowing history change people's perceptions about the threat that immigration poses to the right of white people to hold racist beliefs?
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
From September 2nd to 5th, enjoy free outdoor performances, a virtual art walk, exhibits, and more at the Fort Langley Jazz and Arts Festival. Go to fortlangleyjazzfest.com for more info. And don't miss Beaches and Mountains, a special 3-episode audio series that explores BC's most spectacular landscapes and how they'll be affected by climate change. Head to cbc.ca/beaches and mountains.
The BC Lions have a new owner. It is a local, and he's in the mood to rebuild.
Football ownership is a responsibility at a very high level. It's about giving back, community involvement, and developing skill sets for our young people, and of course having a winning attitude all the way through the organization.
Amber Doman purchased the football team from the estate of the late David Braley. Doman is the founder and CEO of the Futura Group, a company that focuses on strategic acquisitions. The sale of the team makes Doman the first new owner of the BC Lions in 20 years. He said he thinks the team needs a rebuild and a community touch. Their home opener is tomorrow night under the dome against the Edmonton Elks. Good luck to the Leos. You can always find our new news program online at cbc.ca/BC. Our next local news is right here at 11 o'clock after the National with Tanya Fletcher. Have a good night.